Well, good afternoon to those of you joining from our Eastern and Central Standard Time zones. If you're joining from another time zone, good morning or perhaps good evening to you. We're really glad that you're here. We're going to begin promptly as we only have 1 hour with our keynote presenter today and want to maximize the time with her. First, my name is Darius Melvin, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Diversity, Inclusion, and Partnerships for CROPPS, which is the Center for Research on Programmable Plant Systems. CROPPS is a National Science Foundation Science and Technology Center hosted here at Cornell University. Our partner institutions include the Boyce Thompson Institute, which is located also here at Cornell, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the alma mater of Temple Grandin, the University of Arizona, Tuskegee University, and Colorado State University, which is the home institution of Dr. Grandin. CROPS is developing innovative approaches to agriculture through programmable plant systems and is a deeply collaborative effort that includes representation from a wide range of disciplines, crop sciences, engineering, computer science, social sciences, and more. If you'd like to learn more about crops and the transformative research that we're leading, there will be a link in the chat that you'll be able to find out more. Today's seminar is also sponsored by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences Inclusive Excellence Seminar, which highlights academic excellence through inclusive science and creates a platform for extended discussions. I would like to thank my colleagues, Corey Monroe, Senior Associate Dean, and Stella Hine, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, both in CALS, for their partnership in delivering today's presentation. Because CROPS is a transdisciplinary effort that brings together diverse perspectives, skill sets, and minds, we host a series of seminar speakers who provide us with unique perspectives as we continue in this work. Today, we welcome our most renowned and notable speaker to our CROPS seminar, Temple Grandin. A little bit about Temple. Temple is one of the world's most accomplished and well-known adults with autism. She has a PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois and is a professor in animal science at Colorado State University. She is the author of 6 books, including the national bestsellers Thinking in Pictures and Animals in Translation. Dr. Grandin is a past member of the board of directors of the Autism Society of America. She lectures to parents and teachers throughout the United States on her experiences with autism, and her work has been covered in the New York Times, People, National Public Radio, or NPR, in 2020. Most recently, she was named one of Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People of the Year. The HBO movie based on her life, starring Claire Danes, received 7 Emmy Awards. And lastly, this seminar is being recorded and there will be a brief time of questions and answers near the end of the presentation. You may submit your questions using the Q&A function. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Temple Grandin. Temple.
It's great to be here by Zoom today. And what I want to talk to you about is different ways that people think in solving problems. So go to my next slide, please. And the first step is you have to realize that different kinds of thinking exist. We need the skills of different kinds of thinkers to solve all kinds of problems, whether it's crops, whether it's livestock, whether it's a starliner or a spaceship getting into trouble. We need the different kinds of minds. We'll go on to my next slide that basically just says the first step is you have to learn that different kinds of thinking exist. I was shocked when I found out that other people didn't think in pictures the way I do. Everything I think about is a picture, completely a picture. I don't think in words. I have memories that are, that are associated. It's a different approach to problem solving. I just see a solution to a problem. Well, here's a real simple example. A lady was complaining that the airlines had lost her stroller. So I immediately just saw her 2 little kids sitting in a blue Southwest Airlines wheelchair that she borrowed. Not the other one where they'd fall out. It has to be the blue wheelchair where they'll not fall out. I just saw that solution. Let's go to the next slide. And I just laughed my head off when I see this sign. You know, thousands and thousands of people pass this sign in the Denver airport, and they don't see what's so funny about this sign. I saw it. Take a little look at that boarding pass. Area 51, a flight to Area 51 on a flying saucer at gate A51. The flight time is 1 minute. Most people don't notice it. We need people that notice details. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, being a visual thinker helped me in my work with animal behavior, because cattle don't think in words. They're sensory-based animals. What are they seeing? What are they smelling? So I'd get down in the chutes and see what the cattle were seeing. And other people didn't think to do this. The next slide just shows a picture of a chute with reflections on it. Now that reflection could be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's gone. Well, the cattle noticed these things. Other people didn't think to look at what cattle were looking at visually. This is some of the very first stuff I did back in the 70s, was to look at what the cattle were seeing. Let's go to the next slide. There's 3 different types of thinking. Let's go on to the next slide. My kind of thinking is what's called an object visualizer, and I discuss it in my book, Visual Thinking. In fact, I'm going to provide you all the science for the different kinds of thinking in my book of Visual Thinking. Now, the kinds of things that my kind of mind's good at is mechanical equipment, anything mechanical. Okay, there's all kinds of equipment for crops that's mechanical. Art and graphic design, photography, and working with animals. Very, very highly skilled trades. Now, the kind of places where my kind of mind's terrible at is algebra. And I'm very worried that too many of my kind of mind is going to be screened out because we can't do algebra. Some people think you have to have algebra in order to think. No, you don't, because I just see a solution. I just see it pop into my mind, like seeing some little kids in a blue Southwest Airlines wheelchair. Be a specific one because they'll fall out of the other one they have. You see, that was just real simple. Let's go to the next slide. And we need object visualizers to fix things. As I travel around on broken elevators, broken escalators, all over the place, inspection certificates outdated or they've been taken down, screened out due to all the math requirements. Yeah, there's a place for math. And there's another kind of mind that's very good at math. I'll be telling you about that. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm a big NASA fan, so just a few months ago, I got to visit the totally refurbished 1960s control room for the flight to the moon. This is where the controllers were, all refurbished. So cool. Really good historical details there, giant ashtrays full of butts. But you know what? At the Johnson Space Center just a few months ago, the elevator was broken. We walked up 5 flights of stairs. Let's go to the next slide. And I love this, that a kid that's taking welding can see flowers in parts and make them. That's the kind of creativity you need for inventing equipment. In fact, this is a wonderful program in Denver called TACT, where they're teaching autistic citizens trades, and they're teaching them car mechanics, and the car dealers are just snapping them up right now. Really great program. You want to get the kids off the video games, go into car mechanics. They'll find that's more interesting. How about fixing equipment for harvesting crops? That needs a lot of fixing and repairs. They need them. And video game industry just laid off thousands of people. Animation is going to get taken over by artificial intelligence, but you're still going to need those mechanics to fix that equipment. Let's go to the next slide. Now here's your math thinker, spatial thinker. I think in photographs. Spatial thinker thinks in patterns. It's patterns. Computer programming, your traditional degreed engineer, chemistry, physics, music and math go together, and art and mechanical go together. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm seeing too many situations where our math students are not getting developed. I'm hearing little horror stories of elementary school kids being forced to do the same old baby math, and then they get bored, and then they turn into gigantic behavior problems because they're not allowed to do harder math. You know, we need our math kids too. We need all the different kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. Then the word thinker, writer, marketing, psychologist, lawyer, teacher, and that's we need our verbal thinkers too. But I'm worried that our school system's getting so verbal that we're screening out, especially some of our math kids are getting screened out, some of our visual thinkers are getting screened out. Let's go back to how the different minds can work together. I'm a really big NASA fan, and I'm really big into the space program, and they've had problems with the thrusters. Oh, by the way, I looked up the thruster valves. Here they are. Doesn't that look like something that might be on some crop equipment right there? I found the website. I go, I've screwed stuff like that together myself. Somebody didn't put the thrusters together correctly. You see, that's where you need the visual thinker, and the mathematician tells the thrusters when to thrust, so the re-entry angle is correct, so you don't die. You have to have both. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, language is not required to think for either mathematical thinking or visual thinking. Brand new paper in Nature. Let's go to the next slide. And here's some older research that is covered in my visual thinking book that shows very clearly that the object visualizer like me and the mathematical mind are really different kinds of thought. Now, there's some people that are mixtures, but usually one kind of thought predominates. But when you're autistic, you might be an extreme mathematician or an extreme visual thinker. And then a lot of so-called normal people are mixtures of the different kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, the visual cortex stores visual memories, but also you need the frontal cortex in order to get your visual memories out. So where are they stored? I think both these studies are right, and I'll use an analogy. Let's start off on the next slide with the old-fashioned analogy. The frontal cortex is the card catalog. The library is the visual cortex. A modern analogy, Google is the card catalog. Some gigantic warehouse full of energy-eating computers is the library. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. And many people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. I want to emphasize that. But that autistic person that can build anything is going to be the kid that's failing algebra in school and getting screened out today. Let's go to the next slide. And the math kid, nobody's challenging them. And then they turn into gigantic behavior problems. Math kids get in tons of trouble when they get bored. You know, let's take little math kids out and just show them how to, do some of the computer stuff that you're doing to solve some problems with CROPPS. Let's get them interested in something constructive like that. Turns out that I got a big visual thinking circuit in my head right there. We can go to the next slide. Just another picture of the visual thinking circuit. And we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, how do different kinds of minds approach a project? You're going to have to design a planet. So how do art students do it? How do science students that are more mathematical do it? And how do literature students do it? Well, the art students, one group made a crystal planet and another group made palm tree planet. The science students draw a circle and tell you about the atmosphere and the gravity. The literature students just do splotches. But you know what was bad about the verbal thinkers? No planning. They didn't plan their projects. Great big broad concepts, but no idea of how are you going to do those things. I'll tell you one simple little accommodation for us autistic people. Let me write down pilot's checklists for any task that involves a sequence. I need to just write it down. Let's go to the next slide. Object visualizers see risk. Mathematicians calculate risk. Verbal thinkers discuss risk. All right, let's go back to Fukushima nuclear power plant. It blew my mind when I found out why it burned up. The engineers didn't see that you needed waterproof doors to protect the emergency cooling pump that runs with electricity, to protect an electric pump against water coming in there. They did a perfect job of making earthquake proof, but they didn't see that they had to make it waterproof. That's why you need somebody like me. And in my book, I discussed the Boeing crashes and the mistakes that were made there. And it was a visual thinking mistake in the beginning. And then I found out after the book was written, the shop people warned them about the angle of attack sensor problem. And they were just pooed off. No, you need to pay attention to your guys in the shop. Guys in the shop that maybe know how to put these things together correctly. And you've got stuff like this on farm equipment too. Let's go to the next slide. Verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize, much more linear. My kind of mind tends to jump around and not be so organized. And but both the math thinkers and the visual thinkers are more bottom up. Get lots of details, put the details together to make wholes. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the original inventors, when the patent office first started, were all object visualizers. All the things the patent office first patented were mechanical devices. Grain harvesting equipment made by a blacksmith. Airplane made by bicycle mechanics. That's the Wright brothers. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I call these people that are visual thinkers that make things the clever engineers. And what's happening is the people I work with, because I spent 25 years in heavy construction, supervising installation, cattle handling facilities that I had designed. And I worked with a lot of these clever engineers. They couldn't do algebra. They could build anything. And they had they'd taken shop classes in school. Let's go to the next slide. Half of all large 3D printers are from Europe. Let's go to the next slide. This is the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. It was based on mathematical research done at a university in the US, but the machine comes from Holland. And the reason for that is they got lots of kids that know how to do shop, because the next slide shows all the mechanical devices that are on this thing that makes the state-of-the-art electronic chips. Now, I'm going to estimate that this will probably be obsolete in 2 years. And right now, this is an export-restricted device. But I'll tell you, there's only one way to stay ahead. We have to stay ahead. Yeah, we need to protect this, but we better be nurturing our little math kids and not having them turn into gigantic behavior problems because we bored them to death. Let's go to the next slide. And it has mirrors from the German company Zeiss. Those are in the chip making machine. And we can go on to the next slide. Now, this is a large pork plant. This equipment's all imported. We're not making the equipment anymore for pork or chicken. I just saw a video just the other day of a brand new pork plant, and the equipment was from Holland. Yeah, stuff's coming in from Holland. And I went to a hay conference real recently, and European companies are some of the biggest builders now of large-scale haying equipment. I was really surprised at that. A lot of places in Europe wouldn't have a big enough field to use some of this equipment. Well, it goes back to taking out shop classes, screening out the visual thinker, because this haying equipment's all mechanical. These things here are all mechanical. So if I want a brand new pork plant or poultry plant, I got to buy the equipment now from Holland. And one big new chicken plant, it was 100 shipping containers from Holland. Well, you're going to have a hard time getting that if there's a dock strike. Fortunately, they got that straightened out. Let's go to the next slide. And the fabric for the Mars rover parachute, woven on high-tech European looms. I tracked down the vendor for it. We sewed the parachute here, but the fabric came from the UK. And there was a nice video of their tour of their factory. And I was writing down nameplates off of machines, and they were all European. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm standing there in the middle of the Steve Jobs Theater screaming, "We don't make it anymore." Structural glass walls from Italy and Germany. Fiberglass roof, carbon fiber roof from Dubai. Very light. You know, I looked at the pictures of when they were building this. The crane could just pick this thing up like it was a feather. Something this big, if it was made out of steel, I don't think a crane could have picked it up. But it was very, very light. Let's go to the next slide. We've paid the price for taking hands-on classes out of the schools. It's that simple. Okay, I was a severely autistic kid. I had no speech until age 4. I had loved art, sewing, woodworking. I just loved those classes. Now, I tried musical instruments. I couldn't do it. Music and math tend to go together. But we're not exposing kids to enough stuff now to find out what they might like to do. In my class in livestock handling, they have to make a scale drawing. And I've had students in my class, these are college students, who have never used a ruler. I'm talking real recently. Real recently. I had a student in my class just a few weeks ago, and the cattle chute's 30 inches wide. So I was explaining to her on the scale ruler that the cattle chute is 2.5 of the little marks. And she didn't know that 2 foot 6 inches is the same as 30 inches. Maybe they're learning algebra, but they're not learning just practical kind of math like that. I never had that happen before. that someone didn't know that 30 inches and 2 foot 6 inches are the same thing. Yeah, and one of the things we had in the meat industry is I worked with people that were probably autistic that had their own shops, and they were inventing all kinds of equipment. You know, now they're just playing video games in the basement, dreaming maybe they can become an animator. You know, the video game industry, that AI is going to take that over. I'm watching the job market really carefully. I just went out and watched one of the new animated movies, sat through the credits. There's a lot fewer names on those credits for things like making animal fur look real, because that kind of stuff is being done by AI, and it's going to be done more and more by AI. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, TACT. This is a really great place in Denver, Colorado, teaching autistic citizens trades. They have a chance to try out some auto mechanics, try out some welding, electrical, cybersecurity. Now, the way they work this is they have a small class, so you have a mechanics teacher there, but you also have a job coach there at the same time. Because us autistic people, we've got to, really work on our social skills. Let me tell you about a situation I did. I criticized some welding in a very rude way. My very first job, I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo. And the plant engineer pulled me into his office, and he didn't scream at me. He told me very quietly that I would have to apologize. Now, I didn't go up and say the welding was wonderful, but I apologized for the rude talk. He told me exactly what to do. That's an example of job coaching. And then they have contracts with car dealerships, and they'll put one of these students in there after the 2-semester class with a job coach for another 2 months. And they're very, very good. They love them. About a 70% retention rate. Well, something like this can be done for fixing all kinds of equipment you use for crops. I've seen the John Deere places where they say technicians needed. They can't find technicians. Well, they're playing video games in the basement when they ought to be fixing all the mechanical things. And even if you do a lot of AI stuff on crops, you still have to have mechanical devices. Harvest crops, you're not going to do that with, some magic wand's not going to do it. It's a mechanical device. And I just got to see, going to this meeting, videos of the latest haymaking equipment. Very elaborate, very clever mechanical devices. Let's go to the next slide. My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. MIT trained mathematical engineer. He worked with an autistic man, undiagnosed, of course, who came up with an idea for these 3 little coils. Everybody in aviation thought it was crazy, because what they were trying to do in aviation at the time was connect the plane's steering to the magnetic compass. Now, can you imagine magnetic compass? The plane's going to be doing this. Well, the autistic man and my grandfather tinkered in a loft that they had rented that was over a place where they fixed trains. They were a garage startup above a train garage. Tinkered and tinkered and tinkered. But unfortunately, the stolen version was in every warplane during World War II. They needed a lawyer. They were horrible business people. Yes, that's where you do need all the different kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. Educational system screening out object visualizers. I can't do algebra. I failed the SAT in math, so I majored in psychology to dodge math classes, had to drop a physics class, had to drop a biomedical engineering class. I did do a term paper on artificial hips, but I'll tell you where those biomedical engineers meet me. There was a disastrous hip that was designed, artificial hip, metal on metal, where gunk went off into people's bodies. I wouldn't have made that mistake. I would have seen that in the sheep experiments and going, no, this is just not going to work. No, we need our non-mathematicians. We need them. It's a different kind of thinking. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this jet is owned by somebody who can't do algebra, but he's building beef plants all around the country. And he started out one welding class in high school, started out with tiny little jobs, built a cattle handling facility for our experiment station over 30 years ago. Let me show you what he can do for hydraulics. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to show you some clever engineering here. If you know anything about hydraulics, this is an absolute thing of beauty. This is the hydraulic power unit that runs an entire beef floor. Notice how there's some slack in the hose? There's a reason for that. Notice the curve of the pipes so you don't get turbulent flow. This is clever engineering at its absolute best. You know, they could have had one of these at Fukushima. If they put this up really high up, you could run that electric pump motor, change it to hydraulic, you could run it off of this, but you have to put this up where it's not going to get wet. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is under construction, a center track restrainer system. This is a piece of equipment I worked on developing just about 30 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And the person who built the first one of these for me and designed parts of it owned a great big steel shop and was definitely autistic and had 20 patents. And people used to think I was stupid, but I worked with all kinds of autistic and dyslexic people that were undiagnosed. Neurodiverse rules the world when it comes to mechanical stuff. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I got to go out and visit the plant where they were putting up the concrete slabs. This was really fun. I like to show this at autism meetings and show parents, well, you know, big Legos, they're a lot more fun than the little ones. But I'm seeing too many autistic kids growing up today where they have never used a tool. This is terrible. Here's something crazy. I went to a meeting. It was a very interesting meeting. It was on maintenance of power grid equipment. Really interesting. And I found out that major items you need to make the power grid work have a 1-year delivery time. They're going to have a horrible time. These hurricanes wrecking all this stuff. Getting some of it with 1-year delivery time. Yeah, maybe we better figure out how to build some of this stuff. Too many kids have never used a tool. And at that meeting, somebody told me that a man went to Home Depot. Oh, this is like unbelievable. Went to Home Depot and bought a light fixture for his bathroom. And he didn't know that you need tools to install it. He had never used a tool. Let's go on to the next slide. We need collaboration to build something like a large food plant. Object visualizers. The drafting technician lays out the whole entire factory. 1 semester class in CAD drafting. Designs all the mechanical equipment and builds it. The visual spatial, the mathematician, yes, we need you. My mind doesn't understand refrigeration. We don't touch that. That has to be done by the mathematicians. Snow loading on the building, things like this, wind loading on the building, water and power requirements. That's going to require math. And I've worked for every major meat company, and none of my kind of mind messed around with refrigeration and boilers. In fact, when I went out to that job where they were playing with the giant Legos, there was this really elaborate piece of equipment, bright blue on a wooden platform. I asked what it was. I didn't know what it was. Most stuff I know what it is. It was for the refrigeration system. Yeah, that's the mathematics department. Let's go to the next slide. Now, working on the book, I wrote the first drafts kind of disorganized. And Betsy, my verbal co-author, she smoothed everything out and made it really nice. That's different kinds of minds working together. I can't emphasize enough how the different minds are complementary. Well, we have to have both the object visualizers, and then you have to have the mathematicians make refrigeration work. That requires a lot more mathematics. Let's go to the next slide. Architects make a building look nice. Engineers make sure it's safe. You've got to have both. Let's go to the next slide. 20% of the people I worked with during a 25-year career in working on supervising and installation of my equipment, about 20% of them were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, undiagnosed, owning big shops. And now they won't let special ed kids take shop because of liability. Well, in my generation, special ed owned the shops. Special ed owned the shops. Multiple patents, and a lot of them terrible at abstract math. Because since I can't make a picture, I can't remember it. Go to the next slide. Grandparents come up to me all the time, and they discover they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But most of them had successful jobs because they learned job skills when they were young. They had paper routes. We need to take these young autistic kids and learn some work skills. Maybe a volunteer job at a church or at a farmer's market or help out at a vegetable stand. They need to learn work skills where somebody outside the family is the boss. That is really important. And I'm seeing too many autistic kids today, they don't think they can do anything. They're getting too locked into the label. And part of the problem is autism goes from Einstein, who had no speech till age 3, to somebody that can't dress themselves. Yes, they are very severe autistics, they are not going to be doing any kind of stuff out on with crop equipment or anything like that. Let's go to the next slide. What would happen to some of the top innovators in today's educational workplace? I'm worried that they'd have much less successful lives today. Now, another thing I want to just mention right now while I'm thinking of it is artificial intelligence and rogue computers trying to break big infrastructure equipment like waterworks equipment, things like this, electrical equipment. I figure I have to protect my physical infrastructure against a rogue computer. I'm going to use old-fashioned electrical mechanical controls. If that water pump runs dry, which will wreck it, I'm going to have an old-fashioned flow meter in there, shut it down. If the computer wants to dump an entire bunch of chemicals into the water, you have a pipe that's about that big around. So that's impossible. That's a mechanical control. It's hacker-proof. Something gets too hot, something spins too fast, too much pressure, shut down. Old-fashioned controls. I've got to protect the infrastructure that's got a 1-year lead time, maybe a 2-year lead time to replace it. Old-fashioned electromechanical controls. I figure I have to protect my physical stuff that's very expensive and difficult to replace from a rogue computer. If Hal goes rogue, he's not going to be able to get into the stuff because it's not even electronic, it's electromechanical. All right, let's go back to what would happen to yesterday's innovators on the next slide. How about Michelangelo? Grubby little 12-year-old, dropped out of school, running around in all the churches, exposed to great art. Kids have got to get exposed to stuff in order to get interested. He also grew up with stone cutting tools. So then he started making some stuff. Then he was apprenticed into a studio. So it started out with exposure, then mentoring. I got into the cattle industry because I was exposed to it as a teenager. Kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff to find out what they might be interested in. I say you got to expose kids to interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. Let's go to the next slide. Steve Jobs, probably on the spectrum, bullied in school. I was bullied horribly in school. Only place I was not bullied was when I did shared interests. Okay, somebody asked advice to parents. One of the things to do, I got friends through shared interests. That's where I got friends. So let's get the autistic kid, might be a school band and musical instruments, maybe a computer club, maybe a chess club, maybe being in the school play. Something where there's friends through shared interests. I cannot emphasize that enough. Einstein, no speech until age 3. And where would he be today? I'm very concerned that the math kids are not getting their math developed. Math kids can get into very, very bad trouble. Yeah, I want math kids obsessed with something like how to make a better solar panel that will last for 50 years. How to make a data center that doesn't eat a city's worth of electricity. Oh, and ChatGPT, is she ever an energy pig? It's disgusting. She eats more energy than just a data center storing movies. I was just horrified. All right, I want math kids working on some of that stuff. Then they'll stay out of trouble and they'll do something constructive. Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison was probably on the spectrum. Probably had autism, learned how to work at an early age. I also learned how to work at an early age. I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting, went to a special school, and they put me to work running the horse barn. Went to a very expensive school of horse barn management, but I learned how to work. Let's go to the next slide. And here's another famous autistic. He announced it on Saturday Night Live. His engineering is brilliant. I just watched a video last night of how he redesigned the spacesuits. It was very, very, very clever. What he's done in engineering is fabulous. Some of the other stuff I'm not going to go into because it's controversial, but I was horribly bullied in high school. Thrown down the stairs, had his face smashed in. That might be affecting some things. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah, bullying, really bad. Let's go to the next slide. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. Yeah, that's the other reason for keeping the creative things in the schools. Let's go to the next slide. All right, tips for working with those minds that are different. One of the places you don't put them is in a chaotic situation where they have to multitask, like a chaotic takeout window. I cannot emphasize how important the pilot's checklist is. you know, where you give them a checklist. Okay, this is how you operate this machine. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Long strings of verbal information do not work. Now, some of these kids are sound sensitive. So how are they going to deal with working in the shop? You got to let the kid go in the shop. They turn the electric drill on, drill holes in a bunch of different stuff that makes a big racket. When they turn it on, they can tolerate it a whole lot better. And we've got to get rid of the LED lights that flicker. That's another thing we need to do. I'll tell you how to find them. Whip this thing out right here, put it in slow motion video. You won't find them. Vagueness doesn't work. Going back to about the pigeon doo-doo and the welding, just saying I was rude to an employee, that doesn't work. You have to specifically pull them aside, explain what they did wrong, and give very, very guidance that's very clear. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, what's the ultimate goal of education? Where's a student 10 years after high school? Well, I barely graduated from high school, but I had graduated from college because I had decided to study because my science teacher got me motivated to study. I was doing my first big design projects. A lot of people thought I was stupid, and I wanted to prove that I was not stupid. That was a huge motivator. You know, I couldn't do algebra, still couldn't, failed the SAT in math, never have passed an algebra class. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the way I sold my work was showing off my drawings. That's how I sold my work. And that's a drawing I did in 1978. And what's really good about the HBO movie Temple Grandin, it shows exactly how I think visually. And this project, HBO used this drawing right here to build working replica of the system. Yeah, that was really fun to go down and watch that actually work again. It was sort of like going in a time machine. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this next drawing is a drawing I did in the late 80s. And this is the drawing I sent to Cargill. And I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. The unloading area, the stockyards, center track restrainer system. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody they thought was mentally retarded. But then when I started getting into industry back in the 70s, I discovered this whole thing, industrial process equipment. And nobody has an engineering degree hardly that's in this thing. They can fix anything, build anything. It's all visual. So you might wonder why curved. As the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. That's the reason why it's curved. Let's go on to the next slide. And this picture was put in there with it. What I basically did is I sent it to them just cold. 30-second wow. They'd open this up and go, oh, well, this is somebody that really knows some things. Maybe we ought to be working with this person. Let's go to the next slide. And there's the replica they built for the HBO movie. Oh, that just made me so happy. Built from the original drawings. Let's go to the next slide. And I had a very nice brochure back then. There was no mention of autism. I get asked all the time, what was the big barrier? It was not autism. It was being a woman. And where I had most of the problems was with middle managers, foremans. That's where I had the problems. Let's go to the next slide. And that's a big job I did in 1983. That went in the packet of stuff that was sent to Cargill. I'm going to show a few more slides. I'm not going to show all these slides. I'll show a few more slides, and then I'm going to stop so we have 15 minutes for questions. I want to put the Q&A right up. I think might just start with the questions right now, because you can have the slide deck. I talk about some of those other slides, talk about learning how to work. We need to be teaching these kids work skills young. I'm seeing too many smart autistic kids graduate from college magna cum laude, and they cannot handle the workplace because they haven't learned one work skill. That needs to start young. We need to find a replacement for the old paper routes, like maybe go help an old person across the street, but they need to work for somebody who's not family. That needs to start around 11. Really, really, really important. Okay, have any advice for autistic teens interested in animal environmental science applying to Cornell? Well, one thing you're going to find about these kids, the skills are going to be uneven. You might have one person who's an extreme mathematician, weak in writing, for example. You know, that what you tend to get in autism is much more much more uneven skills, where you're so-called normal people, you get more mixtures of the thinking, but that outstanding visualizer that will invent the next hay harvesting equipment. I'm really glad I got invited to the National Hay Association. I was just there like a month ago. I gave the same talk, and they had all these videos up. And, oh, I was watching those. Boy, some of the fanciest equipment was coming out of Germany. I was really surprised at that. Monster hay equipment coming out of Europe. The question here from Emma, do I think that the schools have been taken over by verbal thinkers? Yes. And yeah, we need verbal thinkers, but they tend to overgeneralize a big concept. But how do we actually do do things? You see, we need the different minds. Here, the extreme visual thinker and veterinary career visualize everything but the words associated. But the word, wait a minute, you just move it. If you move it, I can't read it. If you move it, let me do the moving. Okay, an extreme visual thinker. I can visualize everything but the words associated with it. Do you have any advice on how to remember names and words of structures I see in my head? I have some problems with that. It frustrates me. Like I can get a business card from somebody and I can see the business card and I can't read the phone number on it. I have trouble remembering the names of things too. And I hope you're successful in the veterinary career. And I'm very concerned in veterinary medicine that all these math requirements are screening out a lot of really good veterinarians. There's a huge shortage right now for large animal veterinarians. And a year ago, I visited a dairy up in Canada. They also owned a vet practice, and they told me some of their best veterinarians was the one that almost couldn't do any math, but he was absolutely the best veterinarian when it came to figuring out weird stuff wrong with dairy cows. The question is, why are they taking the fun classes out of the schools? Well, I think they're getting hung up on test scores. But let's look at another metric for the success of school. Where is a student 10 years after high school? I think of a bunch of places I don't want them. Addicted to drugs, jail, sitting on the basement in a disability check, playing video games when they ought to be out figuring stuff out with CROPPS. This is something that really bothers me. You see, I'm going back and forth between the autism world. They don't understand any kind of ag stuff or industrial stuff. Now, I deliberately put pictures in there like lifting up that concrete slab because I think school teachers need to see stuff like that in that hydraulic power pack. And that they got to have the respect for the intelligence to design that hydraulic pack. They can't do algebra. They can do arithmetic just fine. But I think they're taking the classes out because they're expensive. They also have more liability than just paper and pencil. But I think it's a gigantic mistake. We've got storms out there smashing up everything. Who's going to put it back together? Not going to be the verbal thinkers. Society's all about labels. You know, the thing is that what's made my life interesting is having an interesting career. And some of the best friends I've had have been in construction. Some of the best times I've had, we'd be sitting around the job trailer, like to talk about how stupid the suits are. And I didn't realize at the time that the suits were verbal thinkers. I didn't know that at the time. You know, it's when I did my earlier book, The Autistic Brain, that's when I discovered some of the first research on the object visualizer and the spatial visualizer. But what I'm seeing is getting so stuck on the label. Parents that don't think their kid can do anything this is really bad. I'm trying to bust up this mindset. I'm appalled to 16-year-old autistic kids who have never gone shopping. This is absolutely ridiculous. Never had a bank account. They're not learning how to do things. Now, the mentors are really important. I had a mentor science teacher who got me interested in studying by giving me lots and lots and lots of interesting projects. Mentors are extremely important. But I also had mentors that helped me socially. I had some hygiene issues that was shown in the movie. They slammed down some deodorant and said, "You stink, you used it." Yeah, hygiene, you got to clean it up. I don't care where you are, even a construction site, that's unacceptable. You know, you got to clean stuff up. But one of the reasons I'm saying we need these different kinds of thinkers, I don't like finding out that Boeing, 20 years ago, sold their factory to private equity. and they don't put rudders on planes together correctly, and that rudder bearings were installed backwards, which would cause the rudder pedals to jam, and they couldn't move the tail. That's not okay. That's serious stuff wrong. We got and a spaceship that didn't work right because somebody didn't put it together right. Yeah, you need us. You need us. You want elevators to work? Who's going to put up all the storm smashed up stuff? Yep, you need us non-mathematicians. You need us really, really bad. Okay, robots. Okay, where I see, well, you already talked a little bit about jobs that are in danger. For my kind of thinker, animation, that's in danger. Now, there's still going to be creative people coming up with some of the new characters. Low-level programming. Silicon Valley has already cut back on just hiring programmers. Now they're going out and spending tons of money on the best AI talent they can find. The other thing with AI systems is they sometimes just make stuff up. Then if you actually want an AI system that if it doesn't think it knows something, it will say, no, I don't know how to do that. You'd rather have an AI system that does that. I just read an article either in Science or Nature that if the AI system wants to always please you and not tell you it doesn't know something, that's when it hallucinates up and makes up a bunch of crap that's wrong. Like it summarized an article on mercury in tuna, and it gave the wrong brand of tuna for the lowest mercury. It gave the brand that had the most mercury in it. But it complicated things where you have to fix things. I don't think robots are going to do that anytime soon. How did I get the respect of the neurotypical people for asking Mr. Showing off my work? I learned to sell my work and to do really good work. I don't show off my pictures. I don't show off my drawings. I've done, some decent work in, while we're talking about, well, here's a paper you might want to read on grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of a sustainable agricultural future. I get sick of cattle being bashed as environment wreckers when 20% of the world's land can only be grazed. What are you going to do with that land if you don't graze it? Yeah, grazing animals done right can improve land. Yes, they put out methane, but so do dumps, so do wastewater treatment plants, so does leaking oil field equipment put out methane. Let's put it in perspective here. No, there's a place for grazing animals in a sustainable food system. And how to get respect? Well, showing off my jobs. Also, I think that when I first started my career, there were a lot more visual thinkers running things. See, things have gotten taken over more and more by the verbal thinkers. Okay, someone decided that they were in the middle of a physics PhD. Okay, well, see here, okay, that's a question I have to have more information. They're asking a student with ADHD discovered their ADHD in the middle of physics PhD. Were they ever in a situation where they started a big project and realized they might be working against their mind? Well, one of the things I learned is ask for help. When I failed my first math quiz, I asked for help. I had to take statistics for psychology, tutor, and I got a C. But I asked for help. And even these big physics things, I've looked at some of these things that they're building now. They've got lots of mechanical stuff. And they've got people that have got to build it right. So I'd have to ask this person exactly where the problem is. Otherwise, you tend to overgeneralize. And no, I'm not going to be an algebra specialist. But there's other stuff I can do extremely well. Okay, it's important first to understand how people think before you collaborate on a project. Well, usually sort of what they end up majoring in and doing kind of explains how they think, because you tend to gravitate towards the stuff you're good at. I've seen people go get a job at a meatpacking plant, just working on the line, and then move over to the maintenance department and start fixing things. Ted's overloaded with homework. Well, I'm worried that things in schools are getting too taken over by the verbal thinkers, because just in the last year or so, I'm hearing more little horror stories about little math kids not having the math abilities developed, which I think is totally wrong. And it's easy to do. Just let them study the math books or a laptop in the third grade classroom. Now, the thing is, you have to understand different thinking exists. See, a lot of people haven't thought about that. I didn't know until my late 30s that other people thought in words. I just didn't know that. Now, the one thing about a visual thinker in a leadership role is they have vision. Now, there's some things, just because you can do something, should you do it? All right, let's take sustainable airplane fuel. Yes, I'm very, very interested in aviation things. Well, Virgin Atlantic proved that pigs can actually fly, and you can fly plane with airplane fuel with a little bit of corn mixed in. But the amount of pigs it's going to take, you couldn't possibly get them. If you want to fly planes on corn, I couldn't grow enough corn to fly planes. It's amazing what the chemistries people can do. They can make airplane fuel out of so many organic substances. Palm oil, I don't want my plane flying on palm oil, cutting down rainforest. The problem you got with bio airplane fuel, I can't get enough of the feedstock to make that fuel. So a lot of people put a lot of money into that, and now they're backing off. Here's another crazy sustainable thing that went broke, which I would have never done in a million years. They said, oh, we can take leftovers from the sawmills and make pellets out of it and ship it over to Europe and feed a power plant with it. Well, what ended up happening is, to get enough of these pellets, they were cutting trees down in the southeast US, making pellets out of it, putting it in a petroleum-powered boat to burn in a power plant in the UK. There's no way I would have done that project. No way. And it went broke, and I was going, should go broke. That is something you shouldn't do. This is where you need a visual thinker. That project wouldn't have gotten started. And we couldn't grow enough corn to feed the airplanes. This is the problem with biofuels. It's sustainable only up to a point. You couldn't get enough of it's possible to make clothing and skis out of a bioengineered algae. This is possible. It's being done right now. They didn't want to tell me, what do you feed the algae? They feed it sugar. I have to grow it. So I have a choice. My skis going to be made out of oil, or my skis being made out of sugar? Yeah, you see, I'm thinking about the feedstock. What do I have to put into it? Equivalent assignments for different kinds of students. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you could do. And a lot of people are mixtures. I know quite a few people that are visual, and they manage to get through algebra. They're a little less stream visualizer than I am. I can actually make equipment move. I've talked to other visualizers that see it, but they can't make the equipment move. Well, you have to know different kinds of thinking exist. Now, you see, in the older school, well, you had shop and you had art and all these other classes, you had stuff for me to do. You see, what's happening is, I think the verbal's taking it over way too much. Studying in college for ADHD or any other neurodiverse thing, you get into trouble in a class, ask for help immediately. One of the big problems I'm seeing with students today is, when they get into trouble in a class, they don't ask for help right away. When I failed my first math quiz, the teacher tutored me in his office because it was a small college. And when I failed my first statistics quiz for my master's degree, I had a graduate student tutor me, and I did something about it right away. You get into trouble, ask for help right away. And that's something that a lot of students are not doing. Can you turn information to a story? Yeah, maybe sometimes you could do that. Let's just take something simple where, like, there's 5 steps for a hard reboot on a computer. I had to write it down. Okay, if I was a gate agent at the airport, I watched a gate agent training another gate agent. So, well, you just do this to print a ticket. I couldn't tell you in a million years what keys they pushed on that computer. I was right there looking right at it. No, I would have to write them down, print a boarding pass, write the keystrokes down, memorize them, and I probably would make up little songs for each thing. They might not be that politically correct, but they'd be funny. And then I can remember, well, we have all the F function keys. I can really have fun with those. Let's just leave it at that. But that's what I'd have to do. I'd have to sit down and have someone show me the keystrokes. I'd have to write them down. And then I'd have to go home and practice what I would have to do that job. But when it comes to frozen jet bridges, I have a challenge. I'm going to make those go away because they delay flights. Frozen jet bridges, I'm going to fix that problem. and they really cause problems when they don't work.
Temple, I just wanted to jump in and let you know we have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes. Okay.
You're doing a
Now there's a lot
wonderful
of
job
questions here.
with questions.
Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe instead of going through these questions, maybe you or someone else should ask the last few questions
sure.
instead of me just going through the questions here in the chat.
Sure. So I'll ask one which comes in from Jose Martinez. He's a co-PI for this project, CROPPS. And he mentioned that it's such a pleasure to have you as a guest speaker, that he's read about your life and work and watched a wonderful movie starring Claire Danes. His question to you, how do you make sure all learning modalities are appropriately taken into account when your classroom size is over 200 students?
Well, that's a problem. What I'm finding in my livestock handling class, one of the assignments is a scale drawing. And I have some students absolutely can't draw. But another assignment I have is an internet project where they have to look up journal articles on an animal behavior subject they picked out. And then the test is just really straightforward. Well, the kids that can't draw, if they do the other stuff in my class, they can end up getting a B. Are we still on? The thing just went off.
Yes, yes, we're still on. We
Okay,
just
that's
stopped.
fine. All right,
Yep.
okay. Because there are some students absolutely cannot draw. They can get a B out of my class if they do get an A on the internet assignment where they have to look up journal articles on the databases, because I want them to learn about scientific databases and get a decent grade on my final, which doesn't have any drawing in it. Yeah, and that is taking account for different kinds of thinkers.
Another question, what do you recommend for autistic young adults who are feeling discouraged because of the lack of understanding and support in their workplace?
Well, you see, that's a very, very general question. One of the things that helped me is I did have a skill that I could show off with the drawings. You know, maybe another kid will have a musical skill they can show off, or a mathematical skill they can show off. And then people look at that and they go, oh, you did that? I guess you're not so stupid after all. In other words, show your work. I'm a big fan of developing the area of strength, then build and work towards a career in the area of strength. Because autistic kids are less likely to be a mixture of the different kinds of minds. You might have an extreme mathematician, an extreme object visualizer who's a non-mathematician, and then you have an extreme word thinker, and they know all the facts about their favorite stuff, and they can be very, very good at specialized retail. Okay, let's say they're running a parts store. Well, they'll memorize every part number. They won't need the computer. They'll know everything they got in that warehouse, and they can be very, very good at that. You know, I want to try to find something that they can do where they can excel in and feel good about themselves. Now, somebody there on the chat, I saw a question briefly about mathematician having trouble with reading. That tends to be the pattern. Now, let's rule out that they don't have a visual processing problem. Some people complain they see the print jiggle on the page. Try different pastel papers. Try printing the book on different pale pastel papers. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It might work 10% of the time, but sometimes that works. But that's the pattern. Super good at math, not so good at reading. That tends to be the pattern. The skills are uneven, but they might be the smartest person you could possibly have for, you know, like some of this physics and stuff that's being done now with very expensive devices with lots of mechanical gadgets on them. You see,
So
we
Temple,
need to have both, and we need to recognize the skills of both. Just going back to food processing, my kind of mind doesn't touch refrigeration. We don't understand it. That requires math. And I found that division of labor in the engineering department is the same in every meat company. It's the same.
So Temple, as you recognize, we have a lot of questions, but only 1 minute left. So I'll ask this final question, which I think is a good one to end on. Temple, you've achieved many incredible things. What do you visualize as your next goal or accomplishment?
I want to help the kids that are different coming into the system now and the younger people be successful. That's what I feel the main thing for me to do now. That's why I'm doing these kinds of talks. I gave a talk recently to the people who fix power grid equipment. Did a talk at a haying, National Hay Association just recently, because I want to see the kids that are different get jobs in some of these fields. I'm especially concerned about my kind of thinker who's screened out. I don't know who's going to fix anything without my kind of thinker. And I want to see the young visual thinkers, and I also want to see the math kids get challenged. And math kids, boy, they get in trouble when they're bad. No, let's develop those math skills and direct it into something constructive, like a better battery, or a better solar panel, or a better data center that uses less power. That's the kind of stuff I'd like to have them obsessed with. That's completely constructive stuff. Or I read online that you do microbiome stuff. Show them some of that stuff. Get them interested in that. That's what we need to do, but they won't get interested in good stuff like that unless we show it to them. It's like Michelangelo wouldn't have done great art if he hadn't seen it when he was a child. And he was a high school dropout.
Temple, thank you so much for taking this time for this inspiring discussion today. And thank you so much for answering so many questions.
Well, and I would be happy to hang around and answer a few more, but it was great being here, and I hope you got you thinking about people who think differently, and we need the different kinds of minds.
The chat has many people writing thank you to you for this time. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and for our CROPPS team, as well as, once again, the CAL's Inclusive Excellence Seminar Series. Thank you again, Temple.